This is one more projector option. I know a lot of you won't have the opportunity, but just in case you do, I would far prefer an overhead projector than a wall projector. And yet, if you don't want to use any projector at all, I've shown you some other ways that you can get going. And with the projector, as well as anything else, you can use as little of it as you want. Maybe it's just to get a size relationship. I've used a projector for illustration many times because I had to fit an illustration in a certain size around a title and heading, and also the dividing into 2 pages. We call it the gutter in a magazine or a book. And it's really critical that I can visualize how that's going to fit. And so, it's really good to have that opportunity to visualize it. Now, I want to just recommend that, again, we come up with something about 6 inches high, this picture here. And just like we had, and we will utilize this later for our angle, our straight edge for angles, and our divider. And I can have room, again, to get it outside the perimeter of this paper. But this is also a real good size for us to use on this projector. There's a couple things that I would like you to think about here. When you're pinning this down, make sure that you kind of press out the edges. I would also maybe put a few more pins in it. You could go outside if you have a photograph you don't want to damage or something. You could go outside the perimeter and then just let it seat down on the edge like this. But if you have a copy, then you can go ahead and do something else with it, like poke holes in it. I don't care. And I realize, again, this isn't going to be for everybody, but I want you to know about some of these things because you'll still maybe want to incorporate an idea here or there, and it gives you a little more knowledge about how other things work, and it might help you in your outcome on a number of levels. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the projector, and when it goes in the projector, it actually goes upside down because the lens is going to flip it over. So I'm going to put this in there. One of the things that makes a projector very effective is the brightness of the lights. Obviously, there's fans in here too. You'll hear them when I start this up that help cool it down, just like that other opaque projector. You have to have some way of cooling it, otherwise it's just going to get very, very hot. It already has a tendency to affect the print that I just put in there, and it could bend it or whatever. Well, that in itself changes the distance from the lens, and you can end up by having your image move around. That happens when you're projecting against a wall, except I had to tape it onto the wall. So if my image moves around, it's much harder to now take it off, restick it, line it all up, and chase that image around. I know it's just a slight movement most of the time, but it can really cause problems because you had the comfort that you had a projector to use, and then you don't realize you ran into all these problems. So this is what I would suggest you do. When you turn this on, we need to be able to have it as dark in the room as possible. And I have a chance, though, to now do much more in the way of sizing this picture than I did with the opaque projector, which is very difficult to adjust. So now let's go ahead and get this off, and we'll get the overhead light off. And I'm just going to give you some ideas because we won't be able to see everything in here naturally. And we may have to have a light on so you can see what I'm doing here, but if we turn out all the lights in the room and we have a fairly dark room, I would put something in the window or have a dark curtain or whatever you could. Those are ideals again. And the more light I can have coming through the lens and nowhere else, the better projection I'm going to have. Okay, now the way the projectors are, unfortunately, we have to take into consideration we're going to have to level them. This hanging down has a tendency to sag a little bit. So you may want to go ahead and get your level out to make sure that your machine is level. And if it isn't, I don't think this is, I want to be able to shim it up a little bit. And it's pretty much the same thing we were talking about with the other projector. I want to be able to shim it so that that front edge is up a little bit, and now I might be able to have something that is projecting a true square on here. I don't want, this side less height here than it is on this one, and that's exactly what's going to happen if it's not level. And so I hope that I've taken care of that. It was a little bit out of kilter here, and now I have a chance to visualize where I'm going to put my paper, or my image on my paper. And so this is a great advantage, and I do not want to tape my my paper down. Some people have mentioned that they have to have their paper taped down in case they move it. Well, this is one of the things that is an advantage, because if your image is getting hot in there and you have a tendency to have your image move, then you can chase your image around by moving your paper, and just be careful that you don't move it. If you were worried about that, though, I would suggest that you correct it by, again, drawing the eyes first, staying in the dark, leaving the white, alone. Only choose the dark side of the line, and then go ahead and use as clean a line as you can to put your little guidelines on there. Well, I would suggest you do both eyes, and then if it moves, you have a chance to go ahead and reline it. When I am going to use something like this, I would go ahead and have a light that I can turn on and off, and I can turn this away from my image enough that I can see the pencil drawing that I just did and the projection, and I can check to see if it's moved. If everything's still lined up, then I'm going to go on to the next things, and I'll maybe do the nose. I would check and see if everything's still lined up with the eyes, and then start with the mouth. And you can go all the way down to the chin. You can do the whole thing if you want it that way. But on the other hand, you can also do as little as you want. I can get the width of the head, I can get the height, and make sure that at least I'm starting in a good place, and go over to one of the other methods that I showed you. But I've already given you a number of options to make sure that you have some options for sizing it on your paper. And this is just one more to visualize what you're working with. So stay on the dark side of the line. Obviously, there's an exception out here. When I have her fair little skin against the dark background, I'm going to want to put it in her cheek, but make it very light. Sometimes I'm going to want to make sure, if I am making my lines too dark, I still want to stay as light as I can so I can just still see it, and not be pressing too hard in the dark, because sometimes you lose that judgment, you lose that visual demonstration that you might be pressing too hard. And so it's good to get a light and be able to turn it off and on, so you can see not only how dark you're going, but also if you've drawn what you intended to draw. And sometimes you'll think you have everything that you want on there, and you find out you didn't. And we've already drawn pictures out enough that you kind of see what we're looking for. We're looking for a fairly refined line left, not just a lot of, I'm not going to go in there and try and do gradations and everything until I have all my single lines as my guidelines. And regardless of the method, that's what I really want to have. Then we'll go ahead and interpret it.